everyone. Welcome to this new episode of Explicitly Pro-Life Podcast. I'm Kristan Hawkins. And as you all know, we are in a season of having difficult conversations. So today I'm honored to have our guest, Danielle D'Souza Gill. Danielle is actually the author of a book, if you haven't heard about, it's called The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America. And I thought she'd be a great person to come on to talk about having difficult conversations about abortion because she is a graduate of Dartmouth College. She's also an author of another book called Why God? An Intelligent Discussion on the Relevance of Faith. She has filmed videos for PragerU. She's been a Turning Point USA ambassador and has also appeared on various TV and radio networks, including Fox and Newsmax and Salem. She was the youngest advisory board member for Women for Trump and Indian Voices for Trump, both of which were coalition on Donald J. Trump's presidential campaign. So Danielle, thanks for coming on today to talk about your book and having hard conversations about abortion.
Hi, Kristan. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast, and I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. It should be fun.
Yeah, it definitely will be. One of the things that I think interests me so much in the book that you wrote about abortion is kind of a question of why. I spoke at Dartmouth. I've spoken there, I think, twice now, and both times it's been pretty contentious. And the student body was just really amped up, very pro-abortion, vocal minority, I would say, or they would say they're a majority on campus. But you're a conservative, and you graduate from Dartmouth a conservative. So, is that what inspired you to write this book, or what kind of inspired you to write this book for conservatives about abortion?
Yeah, when I was in college, I definitely experienced the left, especially in terms of, the Planned Parenthood clubs on campus, more when I was at least in college, that was when Trump ran for president in 2016. So there were a lot of women on the left supporting Hillary because of reasons like abortion, which they kind of equated with feminism and women successful in the workplace, all of that. So I found that really troubling, but I think it was mostly when I left college, when I moved to New York, saw Governor Cuomo light up the Freedom Tower pink to celebrate 9-month abortions for no medical reason, and just kind of seeing this celebration of abortion more so in the culture, seeing it really went from safe, legal, and rare to something regrettable to something that is really being celebrated and pushed on young women to say, hey, you can't be a successful woman unless you have an abortion. So I think that narrative was just really troubling, and I felt it needed to be countered.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you definitely have seen a shift just in the 15 years since we launched Students for Life and the safe, legal, and rare mantra to now, the abortion industry counsels folks who support abortion not to use that mantra because why would, and it kind of makes sense from their point of view. It actually hurts them to say that abortion should be rare because if there's nothing wrong with abortion, then why the heck should it be rare? And I think that word rare shows us and signifies that people don't like abortion. So Danielle, I know you being a graduate of Dartmouth, being there in New York, you've probably had to have your share of difficult conversations with people that you love, that you respect, who deeply disagree with you on about abortion. And I'm sure when you're writing the book, you kind of might have had some of those conversations in your mind. But what have you found to be some of the best arguments for folks or, talking points for folks to use when you're trying to win a pro-choice friend over, or at least, as I kind of call it, like plant that seed of doubt in their mind that perhaps they might be wrong?
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think really answering the questions that whoever you're talking to is most concerned with. So if someone is really interested in the medical aspect, making sure that we know all about that so we can talk about it. Someone else might be more interested in the legal arguments, the constitutional backing for this. So being ready to talk about that. But I think just on the face of it, what are some of the most powerful pro-choice arguments? I think establishing the humanity of the child in the womb so that we don't just kind of concede ground on that. Because once we concede ground on that, I think that's kind of what everything depends on. I think another great argument is really diving into more of the emotional side. I think sometimes we only focus on the facts don't care about your feelings element, which I think misses a lot of the emotional component, especially if you're talking to a friend or another woman who's concerned about this. So yeah, those are just two things I think to keep in mind.
Yeah, I mean, I love the facts don't care about your feelings argument. And that's personally how, I'm won over in conversations. I do think it's hard. I don't know if you've ever read, Jonathan Haidt's Righteous Mind, about moral foundation theory, but it's very interesting that political conservatives and political progressives actually weight things differently in their mind when they're making decisions. And they found that's across cultures, across countries. It doesn't matter, across religious spectrums. And I think that's so interesting because when you talk to a conservative, the facts don't care about your feelings thing totally works because here are the facts. It doesn't matter what your feelings are on something. These are the facts. And, I'm going to make a decision based on the facts. But that's really not how a large majority, sadly, and I say sadly because it's hard for me, make their decisions about issues and kind of make decide how they're going to engage or what their viewpoints are going to be. And I think that is very hard for sometimes for pro-lifers to say the proof is undeniable. Look, here's an image of a child who's been aborted. Here's a testimony of an abortionist saying how they're violently ending the life of a human being. How can you be okay with this? And the other person on the other side will say, yes, but what about my friend who, and then they launch into a story of a friend who had a difficult pregnancy or had to overcome this incredible struggle in their life in order to take care of their children. So I do think that's very important of listening and responding. I know we can all do better at that. I tend to get the same 10 questions all the time. So you can see sometimes on campuses, I'm like, oh my gosh, another question that's the exact same. But every person, asks the same questions. And I don't think it matters. You can be at Dartmouth, you can be at Harvard, you can Berkeley, or you can be at the community college down the street, and the questions are literally the same. And I think that's so, I don't know, that was one of the things that shocked me, I guess, when I went out and started speaking on campuses, that the questions really weren't changing. How do you, when you're having these difficult conversations, you just gave us some really great tips on how to have the difficult conversations. How do you respond to some of them? I would like to go through, some of the more common rebuttals we hear as justifications for abortion, for legal abortion in our country. And I'd love to hear how you would start a conversation about. So, for example, when you were at Dartmouth and someone said, yes, but feminism, but women deserve the right to the autonomy to their bodies. They deserve the right to be free. How do you think that we can do a better job of responding to that bodily autonomy argument?
Yeah, I think it's important to distinguish that we're talking about two bodies, and we're talking about, the woman's body, but then there's also the child's body. So when there's an abortion, it's not the body parts of necessarily the woman that is being targeted. It's the child's body parts. And that's where we can see them assembling the body parts after an abortion, the brain, the arms, legs, and so on. So I think we have to differentiate between whose life it is that we're ending in this situation, and it's the child's life. So I don't think that means we should ignore the situation of the woman. Of course not. But when we're talking about a life or death situation that involves the child, that's where we need to draw our attention. And as far as the bodily autonomy of the woman, I think we have to focus on the fact that we all have autonomy, we all make choices, and in a situation like this, I think the best option is adoption, because this is a situation where the child's going to be born no matter what. We know the exact timestamp on this. It's going to be 9 months, more or less. So this is not going to be a permanent change as far as your body. This child's going to be out of your body, even if you want to make the argument, well, it's in your body. Well, it's not always going to be in your body. pretty soon it won't be in your body. So is this child going to go on to live or die? And I think that if it goes on to live, it should live with people who will love the child and care for it. So I think it's a much bigger conversation beyond just those 9 months for the child and also for the woman, so that she can continue going on and doing whatever it is that she planned on doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the core, abortion is discriminatory. And in that case, it's when you're hearing the bodily autonomy argument, the discrimination comes not only because of the size of the child, but also the location of the child. And my friend Camille Pauly, who I had on the podcast last season, she runs a group called Healing the Culture. She asked that question when she gets, that bodily autonomy argument to justify abortion, about nobility. I believe women are capable of a noble sacrifice. Yes, giving up your body to allow another human being to thrive and grow for 9 months is a sacrifice that is required of mothers, and there's a contract there. But the relationship between mother and child is fundamentally different than a mother and a stranger, and women are capable of sacrifice. And why would we say that women aren't capable of that sacrifice? I love the way she describes it, because I do believe the arguments we hear, especially in that bodily autonomy, the genre of those arguments, it's kind of a selfishness that we hear of, well, I don't want to have a child right now. It's all about I. And the arguments are always I. But when we're talking about is another human being. And so is your desire for the way you want your life to go, does that trump another human being's desire to life? And in the hierarchy of rights, it's life, liberty, and then the pursuit of happiness. So life would actually outweigh your temporary liberty. But no one really likes to hear that.
Exactly.
That's hard to tell somebody, no, I actually think you're capable of sacrifice, and that you will be asked to sacrifice for 9 months for the sake of another human. And we should, as we talk about seeking social justice with others and creating a more fair society, but we're all about eliminating the child in the womb simply because of their location. All right, so another common argument that we hear a lot in the pro-life movement is about sexual assault. And women who have survived sexual assault and are survivors of rape, who the minority of them who become pregnant, a slim minority become pregnant, how do we talk to them about abortion? And why are we so cold-hearted in the pro-life movement? And why don't we care about women who've survived sexual assault enough to tell them it's okay for them to abort that child?
Yeah, I would first just say that I don't actually hear really anyone on the left argue that we should not have abortion unless in cases of rape or something like that. They wouldn't say, 99%, let's not do that, but 1%. So I do think it's helpful to dive into those, specific situations, but unfortunately it's far off from the landscape of what is actually going to happen soon. But I think I would say that in situations like that, we absolutely need to prevent rape from occurring in the first place. And I think anyone who's been in that situation would not have wanted to have been in that situation in the first place. So we need to keep rapists off the street. And I think that comes from harsher crime laws. And unfortunately, many who argue for abortion think that that's kind of the Band-Aid to put on it, but don't want, for example, the death penalty for a rapist when they would advocate for the death penalty for that child who is blameless in that situation, who took no action in that situation, just as the person who is the survivor of that took no action in that either. So I think the solution would be to prevent it from occurring in the first place. And when it does happen, to have very harsh penalties so that that rapist doesn't go on to continue to perpetuate that, and then to hopefully have the child in a situation where they can grow up with loving parents, with people who don't see them in the context of that rape. And I think for many of the women who've been through that, they would say, this could be a reminder of that horrible situation, which I would say closed adoption, which is completely anonymous, where there is no ongoing connection between the two parties. The child can be raised by people who don't view it in that context, I think would be best for the child. And then for the woman to deal with the same healing and counseling process as she would if she didn't have a child in the same way. But of course, I think all around, we need to prevent it from occurring in the first place.
Absolutely. I think it's that, and that's so important when someone asks you that. It's that John Maxwell adage that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And, another pro-life apologist, I think Josh Brahm or somebody said that, when people ask you about rape and abortion, they're not really asking your opinion on abortion. They're not asking how much you know about abortion. They're asking you, are you a human being and do you care about a woman who has survived something horrific? All right. So another question I want to get to you, because I don't think we've actually addressed it on the podcast. I don't think, and we're getting close to 100 episodes, so I'm starting to lose track on some of the guests we've had, amazing guests we've had. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Roe versus Wade. We just did a study at Students for Life where we asked 18 to 34-year-olds, the kind of those liberal cohort in American politics, how they felt about Roe versus Wade. Did they support it? Did they object to it? When we asked them just with no information, we lost. The majority said they support Roe versus Wade. After telling them one line sentence what Roe versus Wade did, it immediately flipped, and we had 57% supporting our opinion, opposing Roe versus Wade, supporting the pro-life movement's opinion that Roe versus Wade is horrific. But something we always hear on the campuses is there's a right to privacy. The Constitution, the Supreme Court, we have a right to privacy. How do you respond to that when you hear that kind of that argument of, well, the Supreme Court said, or the Constitution says we have a right to privacy, and you're trying to deny my rights?
Yeah, I would first start by saying that a right to privacy, if there was one, is not even related to abortion. Anytime we're taking the life of another human, it doesn't matter if we're in our own house, it doesn't matter if we're in a private place, it doesn't matter if we're in our car, it is still the taking of a life. So I think whether or not this is a life is the most essential part, and how they related, a right to privacy to abortion. It was quite a stretch, but even right to privacy doesn't really exist. They took it from this idea of unreasonable search and seizure. So someone cannot search my car without a warrant or my home without a warrant. And they somehow found a way to connect that to abortion. Many scholars who are constitutional experts have talked about how this was very bad law, including Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. She even argued that there should be a different justification for Roe v. Wade. She wanted it to go more in the direction of equal protection under the law and women's rights as opposed to right to privacy. So I think most people realize that this really isn't that related to privacy. The backing for Roe v. Wade really wasn't there. If we read the opinions on it, they just don't hold up today. And I think they held up then because in 1973, people didn't have the same knowledge of what goes on in the womb. They weren't able to see everything through an ultrasound like we can today. So when they said, the question of when life begins is irrelevant, it's very relevant when we're talking about this topic. And I think we've learned so much since then. So that's why Roe v. Wade, when really unpacked, doesn't make as much sense today.
Yeah, I agree. Mic drop. You're done. You got it. I just wish everyone in America would hear this podcast. Make sure you share it. All right. I was trying to think of another common thing I hear just on campuses. And like I said, it's usually around the same 10. But I was trying to think of something, different. I was thinking of when they shout at us at the Supreme Court or we're at an activism event, and the slogans and the mantras that are being shouted at us. Recently in the past 2 to 3 years, we've heard this, you're science deniers. The pro-life movement is are science deniers. We deny science. How do you start that conversation with someone who says that pro-lifers are science deniers?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just so ironic whenever that's used. It's used to literally mean the opposite in the sense that many on the left know that the science actually points to that this is a human being. It's physically impossible for two humans to procreate something that's not a human. You can't make something that's a plant, a rock, another species, another animal. It's physically impossible. So we know that reproduction means this is a human. This is basic science. And when we look at the DNA, we know that this is a human being. So that's when they usually transition into this idea that it's a human, but it's not a person. Mm-hmm. So they create this special status of personhood where only some of us are persons. And of course, that leads to a lot of torture and justification for harming these other humans that are just like us. But I think that the left just loves to act like anything that doesn't agree with them is anti-science. And so, no, I mean, this is why I think they just don't even want to debate us, because they know that the science will be shown and will be exposed as not pointing to whatever they're arguing. And there are some people who are in favor of abortion who do acknowledge the science of this. So mm-hmm. Peter Singer, a professor at Princeton, argues that yes, this is a human being and we can even kill them after birth, up to 28 days after birth, because there's really no difference between a child right before it's born and right after it's born. It's the same human. But he argues that only after that first month do they really kind of gain their ground in the world. Now, this is an arbitrary month. I don't know why that was picked by him, but all of this is just to say that there are some who acknowledge the science, but mm-hmm. I think most people on the other side say, whoa, that makes me look bad. So let me just go down the road of saying that the other people are anti-science mm-hmm. and I just won't dive into it. So I hope that people look into the science more, though.
Yeah, no, I find that so frustrating. And then when you point out the Peter Singer argument or the physicians who wrote in a medical journal, a prominent medical journal in the UK a couple of years ago, arguing, and saying that they had to be pro-infanticide laws because they were pro-late-term abortion, and that was a philosophically consistent position and scientifically consistent position they had to take because there is no fundamental difference. Everyone gets angry. I always find it interesting when I ask folks, well, do you agree with Peter Singer? Do you agree with these folks who advocate that infanticide should be illegal? And folks get angry with you, right? And they're like, how dare you accuse me of being like that? But really what I'm doing is asking them, are they philosophically consistent? And the answer is majority of them are not actually philosophically consistent with their views. All right, so the last kind of question I wanted to kind of throw out at you, I don't think you wrote about in your book. It's been a couple months since I perused the book, but I think it would be one that you could speak into very well. And it's the argument that we hear I hear on campuses, especially if I'm speaking to, and I'm sure you have gotten this as well, speaking to a hostile crowd, you got the Trump line in your bio, so they know you voted for Donald Trump. And so how dare you call yourself a pro-lifer when you voted for Donald Trump? How dare you call yourself a pro-lifer when you're a Republican? How do you answer that question? And it comes in like a multitude of forms and curse words usually. But how do you go about answering that type of question? That if you were a Donald Trump voter, if you were a Republican, if you're a conservative, you hold all of these policy positions that are counter to the pro-life movement. Therefore, you're just pro-birth.
Yeah, I would say that claim has no weight whatsoever. The pro-life movement has always been associated with more of the Republican Party. Phyllis Schlafly and many others have written about this. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the Democrats are supporting literally 9-month abortion. As you mentioned, they have gotten only more radical on this issue. So if they were to say, oh, how can you be Republican and pro-life? I'd say, well, those things obviously go together. And mm-hmm. pro-life policies align with pro-life ideology. So there's no inconsistency there. And I think anything that we're not able to pass is really just because we need more of a majority. However, if they're going to kind of take it in the direction of, well, what about these other issues like immigration, or what about this other, Conan, or what about this other thing, and does that align with pro-life policies? And I would say, first of all, this idea that somehow you can justify killing a human being but at the same time want to allow illegal immigrants, those two things to me are not related. But I think in general, they just want to make it like, oh, well, that's compassion, letting in illegal immigrants. That's compassionate. And I don't think we should concede that ground. I think it's pressuring to us to say, oh, wait, maybe we should concede that ground. But if we really dive into it and look at it, there are so many people who have been the victim of crimes because of illegal immigrants. There are drugs pouring in. There are a lot of bad people coming in. That also means there are a lot of good people as well. And I want good people to come here, but I think that it needs to be legal, because there are a lot of people who've been waiting in line for a very long time to come to the country and so on. So I think the issues are a lot more complex, but in general, their argument would be something along the lines of, what about these other things that aren't compassionate? If pro-life is compassionate, why are these other things that aren't compassionate? And I would actually just dive into those by saying that actually having more legal immigrants is compassionate, and we allow more refugees into the country than really any other country on earth.
Yeah, I mean, how have you gotten this question yet along the same veins of, well, if you're really pro-life, if you're really about serving women and serving mothers in crisis, then why aren't you supporting socialism, essentially, is what the question is. Why aren't you supporting federally mandated and taxpayer paid family leave? Why aren't you supporting taxpayer funded daycare? Why aren't you supporting taxpayer funded, whatever you name it, living wage? Why aren't you supporting, what's the thing that Andrew Yang was saying, just a basic universal income? Why aren't you, if you're really so pro-life and you really want to end abortion, why don't you support all of those things that would give women the money they need to support a child?
Yeah, well, I'd say we actually do support paid family leave. President Trump did a lot for that. So I think there's a lot of details in the nuance here. He's done a lot for women in the workplace. I'm all for that, because I think women need to be able to have children and work if that's something that they want to do. We should not make that more difficult for people. So no, I would say it's more complicated than that. There are a lot of programs we support. I do think that, let's say, funding, for example, for women's health, it should be going to organizations that aren't Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood performs more abortions than any other organization. So why aren't we funding an organization that actually cares about women's health? Are we saying we don't care about women's health? Of course not. We do care about women's health. But when you're saying socialism, what about that? Well, I think once we go towards socialism, we're actually ruining people's lives, because once socialism comes, we won't have the money to pay for any of this. So all of these great things we're talking about won't happen. People will start begging on the streets, eating their pets and so on. So I don't think we need to go in that direction, but other programs, sure, those could be great. So no, I don't think we're just pro-birth. I think we're post-birth too. And I think that's why many Republicans support school choice, something that allows students to go to any school, the best school. They shouldn't be trapped into one just because that's their neighborhood. You're born there, that's your family's income, too bad for you. No, I think we should have a country where people can achieve their dreams and go to the school that they want. So we're definitely not just about birth. There's a lot after birth that we are very focused on.
That's awesome. I think that's one of my most frustrating things. I try to talk to Republicans, about how we need to, stop just not just sharing the facts and the figures, that we have to share the stories to get across that we do care more. And that's actually why we are conservatives, because we believe the policies that we're advancing as political conservatives actually are the best for a free, prosperous society and families. And I just feel like sometimes that gets lost in the shuffle, in the conversation in Washington, D.C. And then plus you also hear all the time of, well, socialism it's always failed because it's never been tried right before. When every single time it's been tried, it's failed, and people end up starving and eating their pets, as you just threw out there. So it's a bad and scary prospect for the future of our nation, one that will actually lead to more abortions and more challenges that families have to endure. So thank you so much for coming on today and answering these kind of common questions about abortion. I hope everyone listening found this conversation to be helpful and insightful. Definitely need to get Danielle's book, The Choice, The Abortion Divide in America. You can get it on Amazon. That's where I got my copy. But I'm sure you can get all the other book places as well. But check it out. And I love the way it's kind of, it's just very easy to read, and it goes through a lot of the common arguments that you hear, like we talked about today. But a lot more, goes into a lot more detail. So make sure you check out Danielle's book. And thank you, Danielle, for coming on and speaking out about this.
Thank you so much, Kristan. It's always great to talk to you, and I really appreciate it. Good luck with everything, and can't wait to talk to you again soon.
All right. Thanks so much, guys. Make sure you share this episode with your pro-choice family and friends, and hopefully some of Danielle's comments will plant those seeds in their minds, and they'll come back to you to have broader and longer conversations about abortion, which after you've listened to the podcast a few times, you'll know how to answer all their hard questions. See you all next week.